Quality programming on KCPT is made possible by the generous support of the Barton P. Cohen and Mary Davidson Cohen Charitable Fund of the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Kansas City.
Production of Kansas City Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
This week, hate crimes.
Now, though, to Kansas City, where the FBI is investigating a fatal shooting at a sports bar.
3 months ago, it was the local story making national and international news.
Welcome back. Now, the big international story this Friday. An Indian engineer was killed and 2 others injured in Kansas when a gunman went on a hate crime rampage.
At least one eyewitness reportedly heard the suspect yell, "Get out of my country." The FBI now investigating whether this is a hate crime.
3 years ago, 11 miles to the east of that Olathe sports bar, a white supremacist randomly guns down 3 people outside of the Jewish Community Center and Village Shalom in Overland Park.
This morning, our prayers are with the people of Overland Park.
Our dad and my son were at the wrong place at the wrong time for a split second.
That idiot absolutely knocked a family to its knees for no reason.
Remarkably, while the man shouts Heil Hitler after he is captured by police, those 3 murders are never prosecuted as a hate crime. In fact, Kansas even now has no state hate crimes law. Missouri has one, but perpetrators are rarely prosecuted.
The system that you felt that was there to protect everyone seem like they turned their backs.
Are hate crime laws effective or just feel good? Do they reduce the incidence of hate in our communities? What should our community's response be to incidents of hate? This half hour, we're on location at UMKC, partnering with the American Public Square to take a closer look.
If I burn a cross in your front yard, did I commit an arson? Or am I saying something to you about your faith, your race?
Barry Grissom served as U.S. Attorney for Kansas during the Jewish Community Center shootings. State Senator David Haley is pushing for a state hate crimes law in Kansas. Mark Levin is founding rabbi at Beth Torah Synagogue in Overland Park. Kansas City Councilwoman Jolie Justice is a former Missouri lawmaker who led the mayor's task force on violence. Jim Jacobs is a New York University law professor and author who questions the effectiveness of hate crime laws. And Rosalind Temple is a citizen crime fighter, the founder and director of Mothers in Charge. What is a hate crime to begin with? Can you help us understand what it is and what it isn't?
Well, the definition that the FBI uses when they talk about hate crimes, they talk about a criminal act against a person or property that is motivated by bias. And that bias can either be based on race, it can be ethnicity, religion, disability, gender, sexual orientation.
So there are federal hate crime laws.
Correct.
But the states have their own too. And so how do we know which goes into effect?
Well, a lot of times we would meet with prosecutors, as we did in the Jewish Community Center situation. We would sit down and talk about who was going to go first. We decided at that time that to let the state go forward first because, quite frankly, the process at the Department of Justice making a determination to bring a hate crime or not was slower than someone who is a district attorney who can say, let's go forward.
A man who shouts Heil Hitler, who is known as a white supremacist, some people would view that as a poster child example of what a hate crime is. And yet that's never prosecuted as a hate crime. Why not, Barry?
One of the things that we looked to in this particular case was that Kansas does have the death penalty. In Kansas, the district attorney was going to pursue the death penalty in that case. The other thing that we looked to, quite frankly, was, and I think I can speak for everyone in the room, this was a shock This was something that was horrific to our community. And we talked about, do we want to revisit that experience through another trial? Do we want to, in this case, do we want to give him another platform to say Heil Hitler? And I think there's value in depriving someone of that kind of spewing of hate, just so I, as a prosecutor, can say, look what we did.
And Mark Levin, when Barry Grissom talks about shock and horror at that time, you were living through it at that moment in time too. You understood what was happening and how the Jewish community felt.
I think two levels of reaction at the very least. One is the horror of having the members of the community stalked. The fact of being Jewish meant that somebody was out to kill you, and maybe you all are not aware of this. The Jewish community are terrified. In a way, I've been a rabbi in the community for 4 decades, in a way that you never saw before. And all the institutions have changed their protection procedures across the board. Finally, it brought the civic community together, and I would say both sides of the state line, in an unbelievable way, because people suddenly realized that when you start shooting, you don't know where the bullets are going to end up. And anybody can become a victim, regardless of who the perpetrator seems to think that the victim ought to be.
So cast your mind back 3 years ago. This is national, this is international news. And yet, in the Kansas legislature, an effort is made, but no action is taken to pass a new state hate crimes law.
Well, one would think after just 2 international incidents in the last 3 years that there would be the motivation, especially after some of the horrific examples we have of why we need it at the top, but also the garden variety crimes, the crimes that are occurring every day that never make the news, that aren't reported because nothing will ever be done about it, because the prosecutor, well, first law enforcement, then the prosecutor, they know that if it's prosecuted, there may be a stigma in their small community for bringing it, and that nothing will come of it.
Jody Justice, in the state of Missouri, there is a hate crimes law.
The Missouri hate crimes law was actually passed in the 1990s, and it was one of the first in the nation that not only included sexual orientation, but also gender identity, which put us well ahead of other communities who had looked at those 2 particular enumerated categories. What was interesting is I went back and talked to the folks because we still in Missouri, for instance, have no protection relating to employment, accommodations, and housing relating to the LGBT community.
Jim Jacobs, you have been in many media interviews, you've written books on the subject, but you've called hate crime laws a solution, though, after all of these efforts, in search of a problem. Why?
Well, I don't think anybody would say that we have a problem in the United States of inadequate criminal law and inadequate punishment law to deal with heinous crimes. And these are good really poster examples. Guy commits a heinous murder. He is convicted for murder. He's sentenced for life imprisonment. There's nothing else left, unless you. And in the
case of the Jewish Community Center, he is also gets the death penalty.
The death penalty.
What more punishment could have been meted on him?
I'm looking at the fact that I've got at least 4 ordained attorneys sitting on the stage, and I'm an ordained rabbi. So I have little doubt that adequate sanctions will be taken against that person. It seems to me that there's a function, however, of legislation that defines a society. And that function in this case has to say there is such a thing as an injustice that is perpetrated against a people or against the community, not simply against an individual.
Rosalind Temple, I just want to bring you in because, and I'm thrilled that you're on the panel, because while we focus on hate crimes, we had 127 murders in Kansas City last year. No one in any way is saying those were acts of love. These were all hate crimes.
Hate is hate. When you kill anyone, we have a community that has not came together. And that's really sad. I think about 2011 when my son Antonio was murdered. November the 23rd, what was Thanksgiving Eve? No one has still stepped up to this day. And then we go back to last year, 127 homicides in Kansas City. It's just people that do not know how to deal with conflict that is taking our young people's life in Kansas City.
We got lots of thank you. We got lots of emails already before we even started the show from people who said they wanted to be here, who couldn't be here. One of them was Derek in Lenexa, who writes, added penalties due to one's thought process is disturbing regardless of how well meant. Whether someone is killed because they were black or because they wore a red shirt, they're just as dead. I doubt there's evidence that hate crime legislation does anything to deter those who commit the crime. Is he right? Is there any evidence to suggest it does deter crimes?
There may not be any evidence to show that hate crimes laws will be a deterrent in the enhanced penalty, but there are a host of crimes that we consider to be heinous and that should be weeded out and punished, or none of us are safe.
Imagine for a moment that the perpetrator had aimed his shotgun at 3 individuals and missed. The quality of what he did would not have changed in terms of his intention and the crime that he committed in a certain sense. He added to it by the fact that he murdered 3 people, 3 innocent people, 3 good people. Okay, but the reality is that what motivated this action and what society has to take a stand against is his, in this case, anti-Semitism, but his hatred of a group. So he would not have been, you're saying, well, you know, isn't he going to be deterred by the fact that he's going to suffer a penalty? But what if he hadn't been successful in his crime? It still would have been a crime. And yet he would have gotten off scot-free.
Oh, now we do need an ordained lawyer. There is a crime called attempted murder. And when you shoot at 3 people, you're guilty of 3 attempted murders. And in most jurisdictions, they stack them up on top of each other, and the person is going to be incarcerated forever. There's no more punishment. I mean, the whole concept of punishing your way into a more tolerant society, you know, it doesn't sit well with me. Like, all we need to do is get really more tough with these kinds of horrific people. There's so many ironies to this. I mean, one of the ironies is it's in the prisons themselves that are the cauldrons for all kinds of biases and hatreds and gang activities and so forth. And that's where they breed.
In 2015, a total of 5,850 hate crimes were reported by the FBI. 5,850. Successful convictions of hate crimes in 2015, 26. Is this a feel-good paper tiger, Jolie Justice?
You talked about 5,000 something odd cases that were reported. I would suspect there were another 5,000, if not 10,000, that were unreported because people are too scared to report them.
Okay, we want to hear questions right now. Stephen Steigman of KCUR News is with us.
What's being done or should be done in religious government communities to change the root of the problem, people's hate or lack of understanding of others' differences? How can we help others be civil?
I've been a member of the clergy in Greater Kansas City for 4 decades. People don't talk to one another in this community. Okay, that's the truth. There has never been a citywide clergy organization. People don't talk to one another seriously across racial bounds. 40 years I've been here, 76 people said we're going to get rid of the division at Troost. Anybody see that happen? So Bindi, God bless her heart, has done something about it. There's a discussion that's taking place, Strangers No More, between Muslims, Christians, and Jews as a result of this event. So this event motivated people to actually sit down with other people and say, wait a second, tell me, what is it really that you believe? And why is it that I'm taught someplace that we shouldn't like you? And what is the result of that? That would change humanity.
Jolie Justice, you have been leading for the last 17 months the Mayor's Citizen Task Force on Violence, which is really about trying to address systemically issues of violence in this community, of all forms. Has anything come up in those conversations that hit at any of those solutions?
Well, Rosalind hit it out of the park when she first said, a lot of this comes down to the conflict resolution piece. And one of the things that we have learned is that we are not training our young people to address these issues at a very young age. You know, there's a lot of obviously great science out there relating to adverse childhood events and how it impacts you as an adult. These are systemic, long-term community issues that will be solved only by what you are suggesting, Rabbi, which is sitting down as a community and within the community coming up with solutions. And at the same time, we cannot have conversations about violence in Kansas City without talking about guns because of the 127...
But the two incidents that I referred to, which we are talking about as hate crimes, were gun incidents.
And the 127 homicides that you mentioned last year, 116 of those were firearm related. Those are conversations we must have, but what we have learned is that these solutions have to come from within the community. They cannot come from policy.
But as somebody who's been touched by violence very personally, Rosalind, do you feel it's all just talk?
I feel that something that Rabbi said, you said we don't talk. That's what I said, the same thing. And we have to start talking to each other before we touch our youth. If the youth see that we don't communicate, it's not going to change.
Hate speech likely leads to or encourages hate crimes. Now, we've got the First Amendment. However, can there be laws against hate speech?
Is hate speech by itself
hate speech,
a hate crime?
No, cannot be criminalized because of the First Amendment. And even if it could, we would have a big debate about what constitutes hate speech. I'm sure people would say, I know it when I see it. It's people who say things I find offensive. We see a lot of this now on university campuses, people trying to shut down discussions and saying, you know, F the First Amendment. Can you imagine? This is what students are saying now because they don't want people to speak who have views which they consider let's say, racist or sexist, but which other people might consider very much part of mainstream discussion. So anyway, every time we've tried to move down that road of punishing people for bad speech and bad ideas, we've gone in a bad direction in American society.
Mark Levin.
I'm going to give you a form of hate speech. You're not going to like this. Who I am is inherently superior to who you are. My religion, my color, my political party, my sexual orientation makes me inherently superior to who you are. That is hate speech. Somebody's going to take that to an extreme. We hear it all the time, and it has to be countered.
But it's not a hate crime.
It's not a crime. It's just hate speech.
Let's say, I mean, we could multiply examples. If somebody says, down with the Pope, down with the Catholic Church. I've had enough of these sexual scandals in the church. It's evil, it's wrong, down with it. Jail?
No. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. That's your job, okay? What my argument is, how do we set the tone of a society? And the tone of a society is set when somebody says, I'm inherently superior to you because of some quality that I don't control and you don't control. It's inherent in me, and we let it go all the time, and that's the source of so much hatred in our society.
People talk about Muslim terrorism all the time, and you know, we're in a war with Muslim terrorism. Should it be shut down, censored, can't write it, can't speak it, can't...
No.
Can't articulate it?
When I hear that, and I hear that a lot as a rabbi, when somebody says, my religion is inherently superior to your religion, I always speak up. I don't care whether it's Judaism, Christianity, because the end product of that is somebody shooting at somebody else.
In Iowa, attacking someone else because of their political affiliation is a hate crime. In Florida, after a heinous crime against a homeless person, they actually broadened the category of hate crimes to include homelessness. In Louisiana, attacking a police officer is a hate crime, and Missouri is now examining legislation to add law enforcement to its hate crime law, which does, including police officers in hate crimes law, water down the meaning of these laws? Or is this a valid expansion of the law to protect a targeted group? Jim?
Well, I think it is the inexorable conclusion of the whole idea. And in the very beginning, women objected that gender bias wasn't included in the federal legislation, and it wasn't included in most state legislation. And people said, well, you know, if we included male violence against women and that was hate crime, it would water down the whole category. It would take attention away from the kinds of discriminations we really want to get at. And eventually, gender was included, but a lot of people still skeptical about that. And I predicted at that time, one group after another would ask for their victimization to be recognized. And it's very difficult politically to say, no, your victimization isn't special.
If you were still in the Missouri legislature, Julia Justice, would you be supporting that expansion of the hate crimes law in the state of Missouri to include law enforcement officers?
We already have enhancements that we kept in place when we rewrote the criminal code. So there are enhancements if you have an assault or a murder of a police officer, of a utility worker, of a bus driver. Those enhancements are in place. We do not need to expand the hate crime laws in the state of Missouri.
How about you, David Haley?
There's a bill that sits now in our conference committee that I would not sign on because I felt there should be additional categories like religion, like color, like race. But why are we going to provide a level of protection for someone who, at the end of the day, can shed their blue skin and others who cannot, who can't shed their religion or who can't shed their race or their orientation?
Stephen.
For our next question, allow me to introduce Chantel Powers. She's a junior at Kansas City's very own Lincoln College Prep.
Rather than just talking about passing a law on labeling and punishing a hate crime, why don't we require youth to learn about the prevalence and how much they occur nowadays, because they're not talked about in school. We require a PE class on physical health to graduate, but we don't require anything on social health.
We have in the state of Missouri, Julia Justice, the legislature has said they wanted certain courses to be taught. Is there anything in the area of conflict resolution that could be enacted with regards to schools in the state of Missouri?
Right now, I do not believe we can count on our state government or our federal government to enact policies that are going to make a real change. It is up to local governments to do this. It's up to local communities. So what we should do is we should go to our local schools and we should say, hey, let's talk about exactly what you just said, Chantal. Let's bring conflict resolution into the schools and require it as part. But you would not be able to get a mandate through the Missouri legislature right now.
How would you address the escalating nature of hate crimes in today's political climate?
We're now into the 20th week of 2017, and there's already been 77 reported bombing attempts to the FBI on Jewish centers. That means we're averaging almost 4 a week.
We talk about escalating hate crimes. We should be very careful about that. We also should remember that the vast majority of violent crime in the country is intra-racial and intra-group. Vast majority. I mean, that is the violent crime problem. It's black on black, it's Hispanic on Hispanic, and to some extent, white on white. But I mean, you say guns. How can we talk about this without talking about guns? How can you talk about it without talking about that intra-group aspect of it? And if you're thinking about the crime problem, if there's one group that is victimized by another group more than any other, what is the crucial victim group? It is women being victimized by men. I mean, that overwhelmingly, if you want to take people of different groups, that's number 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, I have a question here. This is from Lily, who was on the KCPT Facebook page, and she writes, unless we start working on the causes of hate crimes, we will not succeed in reducing hate crimes. How do we actually do that? David Haley.
Well, that's
You're in a powerful
that's
position.
The billion-dollar
You're a state
question.
senator.
I mean, so how do we root out the cause of hate crimes? Where do hate crimes hatred is taught. I mean, it's learned somewhere. I mean, so where does it begin? How does it manifest itself to the point that someone has to go beyond speech and go to action? That's a question beyond my ability to answer.
Beyond the only attorney in the state Senate in Kansas?
I tell you, we've reached the low water mark of the ability in the Kansas
Mark Levin.
Senate.
When a little kid is told he can't play with a little kid down the street because they just discovered the kid was Jewish, or I was just told that my religion is superior and your religion is inferior and you're going to hell. They didn't get that out of their stomachs, out of their heads by themselves. They got that at home. They got that in their religious institution. They got that someplace else. We teach hate in our society.
If nothing else, we have the right to vote, because I believe, quite candidly, I believe government is failing us. I believe government leadership at the state level, at the federal level, is failing us as Americans. I think after this last presidential campaign, there's been a legitimization of hate speech. It's okay to say things that probably wouldn't have said 5 years ago. It's okay to be in someone's face. And what happens when there is that legitimization, the people on the fringes take it to extremes. Now, I mentioned that to some friends of mine. They said, oh, you're trying to be politically correct. You're just a snowflake. And I said, no, I'm not trying to be politically correct. I'm trying to be the person my grandmother and my mother wanted me to be, which was respectful of other people and not talk about other people in demeaning ways. It's us against them. And I think that is a very dangerous path for us as a nation to go down.
I don't think we should leave this thinking the sky has fallen. A lot of people have said that, you know, and we are in dire shape. I mean, there's a lot to feel good about. I mean, we live, I think, in a very successful, multiracial, multicultural, multi-religious society. There's really no parallel to this anywhere in the world. We live in a society now where gay people can get married to each other. Who would have imagined that, you know, a decade ago? You know, there are problems. We live in a country with problems, but you know, most countries, especially big ones, have problems. One of the things that always impresses me is how many things are going on and how much experimentation, how many citizens groups there are in the anti-violence area and the conflict resolution area. So, you know, I think it's at least mixed, but I'm going to want to say that the arc, you know, is moving in the right direction, not in the wrong direction.
Jim Jacobs, thank you very much. Back to Lily's question then. Jolie Justice, unless we start working on the causes of hate crimes, we are not going to succeed in reducing hate crimes. How do we do that?
Well, I agree to a certain extent, but Jim just hit it out of the ballpark, actually, when he said, we have a lot of amazing things happening right now. And the work that we did with the Citizens Task Force, the Mayor Citizens Task Force looking at violence, what we learned more than anything is that right now we have every tool we need in this community right now to address these issues.
Do you strike such an optimistic chord yourself, Rosalind?
What she's saying, it is, you know, we just have to stick together. It just don't stop here. We got to keep on having these conversations and talking and collaborating as one.
Well, Rosalind, Jolie, Jim, and to David and Barry and Mark, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for engaging with us in this conversation.